Hi, and welcome to Chronically, formerly known as Concussion Talk Podcast. My name is Lauren Zayaks,
I'm Nick Mercer.
and we're teaming up to talk about all things chronic illness. We'll still be talking about chronic concussion, but we're going to follow a lot of other journeys along the way. So make sure to subscribe and check back in. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Welcome back to the next episode of Chronically, formerly known as Concussion Talk Podcast. We are so excited that you have taken the time and spent it here with us today. We have an amazing guest, Dr. Eleanna Varangis, who's the Assistant Professor of Movement Science at the School of Kinesiology at the University of Michigan. She's also the director of the ATHINA Lab and a member of the Faculty Council at the Michigan Concussion Center. So pretty impressive lady. We're so excited to have you here today. Thank you for spending your time with us.
I'm so excited to be here. It's so great to meet y'all, and I'm excited to get to talk to you all about concussion.
And say y'all, Ian. So
I know I can't help
get
it.
two y'alls. I see, having just spoken before this started recording, that you're Greek, so that kind of explains. I was going to ask you, I was wondering about the Athena lab, but that kind of explains it. But I know the letters aren't exactly the same. The I there, it's supposed to be, but it was just, who knows, Greek letters. But yeah, but I guess I'll start off with asking just how would you use on which studies on exercise and the brain and how it affects concussion, aging, life cycle, all that stuff. So, but how would you define exercise?
Yeah, so that is such a good question. There's so many ways. There's so many ways in which we know exercise plays such a big role in both healthy development and healthy aging. And I think, exercise can take so many forms. It can be organized sport. It can be engaging in some kind of habitual exercise like running, engaging in exercise classes or activity type classes. And it even includes things like gardening. I mean, I sure appreciate the fact that gardening can be quite the hefty task. And so it is definitely a great form of exercise. And so it really kind of hits at all points across the lifespan. And so we know in kids, exercise is really important for healthy brain and cognitive development. And we know that specific types of sport can actually be preferentially beneficial for certain types of cognitive tasks. It can actually help train certain cognitive processes based on the demands of the sport. And in aging, also, we know that just regular physical activity, whether that's exercise or just getting out and walking around, taking dogs for walks, gardening, all those types of things are really associated with preserved cognitive function in the face of cognitive losses associated with aging. So obviously, just in like the healthy developing person, we know exercise is so important for brain and cognitive health. But then especially with concussion, there's been recent work suggesting that earlier onset of a slow gradual return to exercise, so around 2 or so days post-concussion, really does play a role in shortening the time spent experiencing concussion symptoms, and it kind of shortens that time to recovery. And so we know, especially with acute concussion, exercise can play a big role in kind of mitigating those symptom-related effects. And so the question now, I think, is how would that look long term? And so I think, for folks who've experienced multiple concussions or received persistent repetitive head impacts, this could play a huge role in kind of mitigating cognitive consequences of those injuries over time and kind of helping strengthen and promote brain health and healing.
That's really interesting because the work coming out with the neurodegenerative diseases, meaning like the brain breaking down over time, right? We think about the old way of treating concussion, like putting people in a dark room and not doing anything at all. And so part of me, and maybe it's wishful thinking because of my own concussion history, but part of me wonders what this research is really going to look like. If we study the people we have today and the way we manage them today, are we actually going to find the same outcomes, right, in 30, 40, 50 years? Because when we think about the context of concussion, it was either smelling salts, which wasn't that long ago to wake people back up, or it was a dark room and hide. And now we know about the neural protective effects of exercise. And we also know that people with a lot of concussions tend to have exercise intolerance. And so my wishful thinking is, now that we understand exercise intolerance, we understand dysautonomia, and we're starting to manage it better, are we just going to see better outcomes on the long end purely if we can get people exercising and doing some cardio for that benefit?
Honestly, I would hope so. I think there's so much that we don't know about how current changes to, concussion management and care, as well as changes to sport participation and sport rules and engagement, how those are going to affect people downstream. And I think there's a lot of question about what that is going to look like, and are we going to be preventing deleterious outcomes down the road. And I would hope that, based on the fact that we are generally doing a better job of catching concussions, assessing symptoms, and managing concussion symptoms over time, my hope would be that that not only benefits folks on the acute level, but also on the long-term time scale as well. Hopefully just in promoting behaviors that promote brain healing and health, and doing a better job of ensuring that those continue to be engaged with over time as well.
I was gonna come because I know I sent you a question before about the visual exercise and long term and recovery from concussion, but and Lauren also mentioned that the neuroprotective aspects that ties into cognitive cognitive reserve. I guess something in that area you are written. That's, I mean, you explain that, define that, and just why the research shows why Jakob Stern thinks that the research shows something maybe about concussions or not. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think cognitive reserve, I think, is a really fascinating theory, and it's one of the ones that has been applied fairly consistently in the context of healthy aging, but I think it's one that can apply in so many different contexts. And so basically, it's this idea that over our lifespan, we build up this kind of reserve to cognitive insult. So by doing things like engaging in education, by engaging in physical activity, having an active social life, having hobbies that are cognitively demanding, engaging in continual lifelong learning, all these things help kind of strengthen those connections in our brain and strengthen those kind of cognitive reserve type, factors and processes over our lifespan. And what they've seen is actually that the degree to which you engage in these behaviors can actually considerably delay the onset of dementia symptoms if they are going to crop up. Or it can result in fairly preserved cognitive function quite late in life. And so it's this idea that basically your brain can take more insult related to either aging or neurodegenerative disease and still be fairly cognitively intact, because you've built up this strong reserve of cognition to kind of bolster that process as you experience these different changes. So you might see two people with the same amount of neural damage or neural insult, but one person may be experiencing more cognitive symptoms than the other. And the theory is that perhaps that the person who's not experiencing those cognitive symptoms has more of these reserve processes able to be tapped into after that insult, that's able to kind of preserve cognitive function in the face of injury. So I think this is applicable not only for obviously age-related cortical loss, that's kind of a normal part of healthy aging, and also neurodegenerative disease. But I think the same issue could be cropping up with concussion as well. I think the degree to which you engage in these processes, I certainly don't think that it's not going to help folks who have a history of concussion or repetitive head impacts. I think it's something that we think in general can kind of keep your cognitive strength up over time. And they found even, midlife engagement in these processes can, be beneficial in older adulthood as well. And even in older adulthood, the degree to which someone has like an active social network, engages in these cognitively stimulating activities, like things like crossword puzzles, those can really kind of help with cognitive function even quite late in life.
Oh, you mean like when my mother sent me an article that said grandparents live longer, so, hurry up kind of?
That's a whole separate argument.
And just for the listener, so cortical loss would be when the brain actually loses some volume, it loses some of its size, which is a natural part of aging, also contributes to older adults being more susceptible to head injuries because that brain has more room to slosh around, so it becomes a little bit more susceptible to that kind of damage, just so that they understand what that means. And so because your research isn't only in sports, it's that aging process across the lifespan, different types of people, not just the athlete. And so as we talk about this person at the later stages in their lifespan, and we're talking about this cognitive reserve piece, So now I've got a patient who's on the verge of retirement. And historically, this was the male patient, but I think females will end up having the same presentation as the workforce changes. But as soon as I retire, I'm going to die. Or as soon as I retire, I'm going to go downhill, right? Historically, that 65 to 70-year-old perspective that you hear. And so what could be some advice maybe that we can give people? Hey, we understand like some of that social perspective is we stop working and so we're not as cognitively challenged. And maybe there are ways where we can retire and we don't immediately have to go downhill, but we can keep engaging our brain. Maybe we can be more active because we don't have as many hours at work. What would be some general things that you're seeing in the research, and then some like key tips that people could take away from that?
Yeah, I think that's such a great way to kind of segue into like how do we promote brain health and aging and everything in a variety of ways. And I always think of, every time I think of cognitive reserve, like the person that pops into my mind is my grandma. And so she lived to 102 and was a really kind of impressive person in so many ways. But I think one thing that I really took from her is, even in, after my grandfather's retirement, she was so active with her community. She volunteered at a local preschool that was helping people who didn't have financial resources. She was helping at the library. She was helping in so many different kind of volunteer opportunities. And she was also very, very into gardening, and she was super physically active in her garden as well. And she also was the only person who I think I've ever met who can do the New York Times crossword and pen every single day, and she would finish it every single day. I mean, this woman was incredible. But I think there was so much that she did on a daily basis that kept her active and kept her really cognitively intact and healthy so late in life. I mean, even in her 90s, she was still cooking full, beautiful, amazing meals for her and my grandfather. So a really incredible person. And I think a lot of that kind of community engagement piece, as well as the physical activity, as well as that cognitive stimulation, really helped keep her healthy quite late in life. And I think that's a great example for everyone. I think the more that you can kind of engage with your community, I think it not only is cognitively demanding in kind of a good way, but it's also a great social support as well, kind of interacting with folks in different ways, having to remember new names and new faces, just so many different cognitive and social processes that are being tapped into that helps keep those kind of new connections forming in the brain. Engaging in some kind of cognitively stimulating hobby, if that's the crossword, if it's mahjong, if it's anything that kind of keeps you challenged on a daily basis, I think it's great. Keeping that physical activity component going for a daily walk, even just walking around the neighborhood or walking around town and kind of checking out the new shops that are opening up, things like that. And making sure that you kind of maintain that social support network with close family and friends. I think that's also been a really key piece in healthy aging. And another piece that I think everyone, talks about, but I feel like we all talk about it and then people are like, I don't really want to hear that, is maintaining a healthy, varied diet. I know that, people have talked about a healthy diet being critical for aging, and I think that feels really big and like onerous. But I think when you distill it down to the idea of like the Mediterranean type diet of having, a balance of different types of proteins, having a lot of plant-based proteins available as well, and just a varied, colorful diet, I think is always a good piece of advice to just give. Obviously, having the occasional treat's probably what keeps you happy longer. So not gonna I don't know, just
Everything in moderation.
Exactly. But I always
Well,
talk to my kids about it's okay to have treats, but you got to have all the colors of the rainbow. So
it's interesting
Yeah.
when we talk about older adults, and I know we're getting a little bit out of just concussion research and into just general research, but the importance of social structure and the importance of being socially engaged, because isolation is such a negative health predictor. And then
yeah.
when we kind of think about even the younger people, right? This isn't unique to older adults. It's just really important that older adults, for aging in place, stay actively engaged in their community. But after you have a major head injury, right? One of those ones that doesn't get better with fig leaves in 3 weeks, but one of the big ones. And when you have that social isolation, I can't go places that have lights. I can't go places that have noise. How we need to start to not be afraid of our symptoms, but learn to start to push just up a little bit, right? That 2 to 3 out of 10. And then we back off, so we're not pushing through symptoms. But we really need people to become re-engaged in their community as quickly as possible, because just like the older adult that has all these negative health outcomes from being isolated, everybody across the age span doesn't do well when we're forced to not be with our friends or not go to school or work or interact with our kids. It starts to really impact our mental health and our ability to heal.
Absolutely. And I think the kind of benefit, the both benefit and curse of team sports is I think you get so much of that social infrastructure that's part of the activity. So in addition to your family and friends, you also have this really finely enmeshed network of folks who are your go-to people. And you see them every day at practice, you see them at games, you collaborate with each other, you cooperate and depend upon each other. It's this really kind of unique environment that's a very social and interactive environment, but you also have a lot of like, you depend on these people. You have a lot of respect for their role in a specific context. And I think that's such a unique environment because it is such a rich, kind of wonderful social support system that frequently becomes a lifelong social support as well. But I think especially when you think about concussion and head injury, removal of the person from that social environment, because it is based around the sport. And so you can't be engaging with it until you have returned to sport. That is a huge, huge negative factor that these individuals face post-concussion. And a big source of kind of feelings of isolation and loneliness and being kind of removed from that social support that they're so reliant upon on a day-to-day basis. And I think kind of the benefit of this like weird post-pandemic era is that we do have a lot of tools to stay socially engaged in ways that don't necessitate face-to-face participation. Obviously, I think face-to-face social engagement is probably a lot better than virtual, but you know, at the very least, we have so many resources to be able to engage socially with folks, even if we're not able to be there in person. So my hope would be that there are ways to kind of slowly bridge that gap and be able to kind of make it not feel so isolating. But obviously, I'm sure there still is quite a feeling of isolation and not being able to kind of be there for the teammates and everything. That's a unique things that athletes experience for sure post-head injury.
I was gonna ask you about the. I didn't ask you this beforehand, so I'm sorry if I catch off guard here. But you were saying there's individual sports versus team sports. So say, do you have any sort of research or any sort of inclination towards how would recovery or not instance because instance in team sports is obviously higher like in hockey and football and things like the people colliding, but like sports, but I mean, individual sport, let's say cycling or something like that, but there's a head injury in cycling or brain concussion in cycling compared to concussion in hockey or football. What are there differences in recovery time or rehab approach or anything like that? I guess kind of both of you, I guess, but.
That's a great question. I will say I do not know enough about that. I think that's such an important piece, though, kind of how that almost like the self-reliance in a team in an individual sport might differ in terms
and
of
the social interaction in the team sports,
Totally. And it might benefit in some ways because you don't have that absence, that feeling of like social isolation because you're not engaged. But I think some of the research that we've done, I had an honors thesis student who did a project, Brooke Lang, who looked at the differences in emotional processing between individual and team sport participants across childhood. So between the ages of, I think, like 8 and 17. And we found that there were actually no differences between individual and team sport athletes, which we had kind of hypothesized. We thought, team sport, you're having to like look up and, process everything on someone's face in milliseconds. They're probably going to have faster emotional processing than individual sport participants. But we actually found no differences, but both sport groups were actually better than our non-sport group at this task. And so we thought that was a little bit surprising, but it also, I think, kind of harkens back to this idea that so much of individual sport is actually like trained in a team environment. And so even when you have this like individual self-reliance and there's a lot of internal processing going on, it could just be the case that these folks still have that social and emotional development from practicing in a team based environment for most of their career. So I similarly would think, maybe there could be differences, especially post-concussion based on that individual and team sport. But part of me wonders whether that you still have that team mentality because you're practicing together, even when you compete by yourself.
Yeah, I mean, think about swim team, right? I mean, it's an individual but team sport at the same time. Like you're the only one in the pool in that moment, but you're still practicing together, or a cycling team, or I don't know, Park City, like you have mountain biking club and ski team and whatever
Yeah,
else.
it's just true. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
I
But
was,
of
I was,
course,
I
like the
was-
return to sport part would be different though, right, Nick? Because the checks and balances would be different for cycling versus football, or well, you would hope. You would hope that the football athletes have to be a little bit more prepared to go back, since the whole point is to be knocking into one another one another. But versus cycling, I would imagine that in some ways we could get them back a little bit earlier, and that's clinically what we see is that, you know, the cycling accidents are much more traumatic. It's usually a car versus a cyclist, but there's only so much we can prepare them for
or a
that, as
tree.
opposed to having to jump or hit into another athlete. We want to make sure that brain is really ready to go before they even get back out on the field.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that the thing that also I thought was super interesting is I think being a member of the Concussion Center, I'm exposed to so many people who do different types of research or clinical work with folks who've experienced head injuries and concussions. And one person that we've engaged with quite a bit is someone who specifically works with dancers. And she has developed this protocol for return to dance post-concussion, which is a brand new concept and field for me. But it's a really fascinating and also very complicated return process as well, because not only do you have this idea of, you know, you're returning to physical activity, returning to that just physical component, but there is so much of dance where you're reliant on other people in ways that require balance or that require very intact vestibular systems. And you're spinning and doing all this stuff that aggravates these symptoms as well. And I had never really given much thought to the fact that obviously in dance, you're not only dancing by yourself, but frequently you're lifting a partner. And so if you're the person lifting someone, you have to be able to know that this person isn't going to drop you. And so there's so much of that going on there as well that I just hadn't even thought of. And I'm sure that there are other activities where, you know, even though it might feel more like an individual type activity or sport, there really is this kind of codependence where you need to be able to rely on that person in ways that may be dependent upon the absence of concussion symptoms or specific concussion symptoms as well.
You know, I don't know if you have the answer to this, but as you were just talking about dancers, I would wonder if their reliance on their vestibular system, it being such a finely tuned machine, I wonder if they have more symptoms when they have vestibular impairment just because their gyroscope is so effective, or I would wonder if it's a neural protective benefit. I've never looked at those incidence rates or what their like quality of life profile, like a quantitative study would show, but that's really interesting, right? Because it's either that they're heavily reliant on it, and so a small fraction that wouldn't affect a normal person really gets them, or that they can absorb more and make up for more, and maybe injuries are missed a little bit more often because they can compensate. But I don't know if you have an answer to that, but that's what you made me think of. But
I don't. And that's such a great question. I feel like that taps into almost like, do they have some kind of like vestibular reserve, or is it almost like a more sensitive system? And I would think it would be similar for, you know, ice skaters, gymnasts, anyone who's actively like engaging in a lot of like vestibular processing during competition or during their activity. I think that I think that's a fascinating question.
So now you can do another project.
Oh my gosh, easy. Next step.
Actually,
I don't even know how you would study that.
That kind of links well to my question about rehab. Like, do you find, say dancers or just non-competitive athletes, people are just out for recreational, they run or they pick up volleyball or basketball every week or something like that. Do they have better? Are they better rehab? Their rehab, guess again, both of you. Better rehab, recovery, and rehab for them, or for someone who's not interested and doesn't participate in any sort of exercise like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I feel like I don't know a ton about that acute head injury rehab process and how that might differ. I think there are certainly so many factors that could contribute to how someone adheres to rehab, and you may have this kind of drive to return to your sport. So you might either adhere really, really well to rehab and do every single thing perfectly, or you might try to rush through it so you can get back to your sport quicker or things like that. So I think that's such a good question. I wish I knew more about it, and I'm sure there are a lot of personality factors at play there too, and you know, even just those who engage in exercise as a form of just kind of getting outside and engaging physically with the world more versus those who rely on it for competition or for employment. So I think that's a really great question. I'm also curious.
There's a couple answers to that question, actually. So an athlete who's in a D1 setting, right, Division I setting, you're thinking like, University of Michigan kind of thing. They're going to have this incredible medical infrastructure that's not available in the wild, right? Like a lot of people are underinsured, or maybe they don't know where to go. There's no protective benefit of like, if I hang a I treat concussion shingle on the wall of my clinic, that doesn't really mean anything right now in the United States, right? It could mean a lot of different things. And so the athlete in the high level setting is going to face a lot of pressure internally or externally, depending on where they are, to return to sport. And that may change their trajectory and how close they come to fully better. But they're also going to receive better care on the front end, so they should recover faster as well, right? Versus that weekend warrior that you're talking about, that club sport person who now works a job and also does pick up softball, beer league or something. They have to find their way through the medical system. And so they're at a disadvantage from the start because they might not get access to that early treatment, which then really changes the trajectory of their recovery. And then it's all on their dime for what type of treatment and how they find somebody. So I think that they both can recover as well. I think that the big issue is like, what are these societal factors at play? And then what type of pressure is on them to get to that finish line, whether it's internal, intrinsic, or external away from them.
Yeah, we were talking to Steve, actually, the CRO about this last time. Not last week, but for 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, there was. But yeah, but about that whole the access to care factor of it all. Yes, but yeah, Lauren, I think you had a question.